Something that I often do when I finish a major project is I take a break and then I need to go back to the studio and reconnect before I can properly slow down.
What do you mean by saying reconnect to slow down?
Well, there's a sense of purpose in the studio,
Uh-huh.
and if I kind of stop cold turkey, as they say, there's like a kind of unmooring that takes place. Just to give you an idea, um, I canceled. There's one exhibition that I canceled
Okay.
in the last 6 months, but I opened the show that's up on the screen right now at Green Art Gallery in Dubai in early November. The last day of that exhibition was the first day of the exhibition at Nature Mort in Mumbai, which I was unable to attend. And then the last day of this exhibition was the first day of the exhibition at Alexander Gray in
Jesus.
New York. And a week after that show opened was the opening of the Whitney Biennial, a week or two after. So the exhibition, I installed at the Whitney a few days after the Alexander Gray opening. And in between that time, my father died. Many people have said when you see someone, you have no idea what that person's carrying with them, what that person's experiencing. And so whoever's emails I haven't been replying to, whoever feels ignored.
I mean, anybody who's emailing you in this terror, like, they can give it a rest. It's fine. I've seen like when you are stressed and when you're working on shows and putting things together. And this time I will say, like, I'm of course like we weren't you were traveling for a lot of it, so it's not like we were interfacing all the time. But what felt different to me this time is that there was a different level of like calm and intention about how you were moving through all this. And I'm curious, like, I mean, you've been showing for over 20 years now. What is it, what got you to the point where now having multiple exhibitions, traveling all over the world, building out shows and designs and like leading projects, how do you prepare for that differently now that makes it, I mean, I really do think it's true. Like you're calmer this time around.
I think with some help, I recognize that I thrive on fear.
Oh shit. Okay.
That my motivation and drive is purely fear based, and I started to try to unlearn that. Um, and I think it's also been, in some ways, better for the projects. In the studio, I'm able to focus in a way, once I get into the studio, that I don't anywhere else in my life.
Hmm.
But to try to kind of have that kind of presence in the life outside of the studio and to respect the life outside of the studio has been really critical in kind of unlearning that fear driven uh, mode.
That's beautiful. I mean, I know that that's a process, and like I can totally relate to that. There are things about how I move now that feel much more intentional because I've like sloughed off some of the fear. In the studio, you have a kind of distinctive methodology of like how you encounter a surface. Like, do you always attack it the same way? Maybe attack's not even the right word for how you approach it. Do you always um, move into it the same way? And does that also give you a kind of sense of stability?
Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is how to go back to a time when I was much, much younger and much, much freer. Um, I think what happens through the kind of professionalizing this activity is that things become kind of systematized in a way that's not always the same as ritualized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think I've been really trying to tap back into those kind of that ritualistic approach that puts me in a state of mind where I feel completely free and open.
Feels related to related but different to something that we've talked about as well. Like, um, we're both aging artists, and I mean, we're doing a great job aging. Let me just say that. But um, to tap into what I think you designated it as this, like young artist energy.
Hmm.
And there's that moment like when you're in your 20s where you're saying yes to just about everything, you're going to every single event, you're drinking up everything, and like you're hungry, you're really fucking hungry. And like sometimes it's easy to get far away from that too. And like to tap into your young artist energy, YAE, or your yay, is something that we've talked about from time to time where it's like, oh yeah, gotta tap into the yay.
Yeah, and it's like there's a certain kind of curiosity associated with that. You
Yeah,
know, it's not just like a hunger, but it's a curiosity and an openness and a fearlessness, honestly. Like you're
exactly.
not afraid of falling on your face. You're not afraid of losing a painting or losing an artwork, you know. Um, when you're on a deadline, you're afraid of losing that artwork, right? And the only thing that'll make that piece work is if you stop being afraid, you know.
Yeah.
I'm even looking further back than my 20s.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We're talking like crayons?
We're talking about like teenage energy, like that kind
Oh.
of teenage curiosity, you know.
When
That
things really matter to you too.
yeah, exactly. And when I was so emotionally open and unafraid, and you know, you just get kind of hurt over and over again, and then you start building up a shell. I've started to find a way to tap into that energy in the studio, and then uh, as I leave the studio, make sure that I'm not carrying that openness, because it's quite dangerous to carry that openness out into the world.
Fast forward to like grown up Kamrooz coming into the studio, trying to develop these projects and stay open. I'm looking at these and I think it's going to be a really nice foil or like a way to expand how this work has kind of come to be where the paintings they're finding their way within the grid versus the Alexander Gray show. For those of you who saw it, we'll also show images, but does it feel like the Alexander Gray show is a point of no return? Like does it feel like after leaving the grid that way that the paintings are always going like that there's new ways for you to like find manipulation there?
The first exhibition that I made of works that I titled under this kind of this title arabesque, which has been often misunderstood because I've used it somewhat ironically and critically. That exhibition had works that really kind of adhered to the grid and those that didn't. So
Okay.
from the beginning, there was this push and pull. There was this kind of openness and tightness between the paintings.
Hmm.
Um, as I settled into exhibiting these paintings along with sculptural works and things, they kind of became more structured for whatever reason. Um, the exhibition at Alexander Gray is a collection was a collection of works made between 2020 and 2026. So these paintings were not all um, new. I mean, I consider them all recent works.
Right.
Um, they just have a different relationship to the grid, and they have a different relationship to time.
Hmm.
So they were made in a very different way than executing a painting, putting it away, executing another painting, and making a group, right? They're not sequential that way. They kind of each stand on their own. At one point, when we were installing the exhibition, I thought almost that each painting seemed to be like almost indicative of an exhibition of itself. You know,
Really?
like it could be part of a series of other works. You know,
I guess yeah, I understand what you mean by that.
yeah. So the paintings were really for me paintings that were put away for a while that I returned to. I gave them as much time as they needed and sometimes more. Um, I usually allow a painting to sit in the studio for 2, 3 weeks before I'm comfortable with calling it complete.
Hmm.
And in this case, these paintings had far longer than that, except for the most recent two paintings, which were pretty fresh.
In that period of 2 to 3 weeks, how often do you find yourself going back in?
With many of these paintings, I find myself going back into them like months later.
Oh,
But at the same time, the painting on the right here was quite fast, actually, and it's quite thin. And the one on the left is quite layered. It was one of those paintings that was put away and returned to over months. So
yeah,
there's
that was the
a
painting I remember seeing in the studio, and you almost being like not afraid of it, but that you were like, not yet, not you right now.
Yeah, and sometimes I have to turn them away so I don't see them,
Yeah.
and then come back to them later with fresh eyes. Sometimes it only takes a few days, sometimes it takes a few months. I used to throw more paintings away, I used to destroy more paintings.
Hmm.
And through this process, I've kind of, I was like determined to see where it went, see if they can recover themselves once they've gone too far. Because there's this point in painting that where I achieve something that seems worthy.
Hmm.
Um, and but I don't know how long that's going to last, right? It might just be that afternoon, and then
Yeah.
you come back the next morning, and it's whatever I thought was there isn't there anymore.
Right.
And so that kind of, and then there are others where it's like it's still there, and then there are others where someone else has to, like my partner Jessica has to tell me like don't touch that, and I listen, and then I don't touch it, and I wait a couple weeks, and then I realize what had happened really, and sometimes I do, and it does need to change, but
As time has gone on and as you've like continued to develop these rhythms and also develop bodies of work, are you looking for, I guess, new rhythms? Like, or is it something where you're intentionally trying to sabotage what came before?
I am not the type of artist who is constantly trying to break new ground. I think what happens for me is that long ago, I realized that I can't do the same thing twice, even if I try.
Hmm.
That every painting has its own solution, and the only way to resolve a painting is to be as honest as I possibly can with myself and with that painting. And so often that requires, when I talk about being open and curious,
Hmm.
that's really uh, where it's at. It's more like the state of mind rather than uh, the setting an intention to like radicalize the painting.
Right.
If I'm just simply trying to figure it out and I'm completely open, then something will happen that has never happened before, and I just have to trust that. But I can't look for it. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like if I'm looking for it, I'll never find it.
Sure. And now you have, I mean, I feel like 15, 20 years into a practice, you also, you know the difficulties of that and you know the pleasures of that too. Like, I think there's moments when you're still trying to figure out what is your process and what does that mean to you. But then there's a I don't know, like a fruition where finally you can say, okay, this is how I work, and there's going to be new things that get folded into this, but there's a beauty in this kind of the ongoing struggle of how you need to make this work and how you need to stay present and um, find your way with it.
Yeah. There's something like, when I was in my 20s and when I was in graduate school, I thought it would be really interesting to make every exhibition feel like a group exhibition or something, like just and I think there's something to be said for that. Working within some kind of system, I found as I got older became so rewarding, in terms of like almost working in a mode like in music, working in a mode like in whether it's traditional Iranian music or jazz, where there's a mode and then within that mode is when the improvisation takes place, and unexpected things happen, and you don't know how long it's going to last, but then it comes back to the theme and resolves itself. I feel like that structure has become more and more important to me.
It feels like restraint there is also key.
As important as mark making, if not more important.
Hmm.
I mean, restraint is uh, so much of, I think, when great things happen in the studio, they happen because of exercising restraint.
Hmm.
Um, and that can even mean restraint in terms of like actually even going to the studio.
Oh.
There are times where I two of those paintings have the word flaneur, and they there's a reason for that. Walking away from a painting and going and walking around and wandering about in the city, and one of my rituals is to go to the Met and then walk through the park afterwards, and take myself out to lunch or something. Uh, so that
Treat
kind of
yourself.
activity to get outside of the studio, I mean, is like so critical, and it's the advice I give most to other artists. When somebody's stuck, I say, get out of the studio, just leave. And they're like, no, 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 I have a deadline, you don't understand. And I said, you are going to do damage. Get out of the studio, you're going to set yourself back 2 weeks.
That's
uh,
really good advice.
yeah. So yeah, and then restraint just in terms of mark making. And I think as I've something else that comes with experience is I've become a better viewer. And so becoming a better viewer of my own work,
Hmm.
I'm able to recognize more when something has happened,
Hmm.
and that shouldn't be disrupted. And I might not know exactly what the next move is, and that's okay. That's when you stop and you clean up and you leave, right?
There's so many moments where sabotage and like breaking something open is the way to the next thing. And so I'm I'm envious a little bit hear about a practice where it is about the consistency and restraint and the going in and realizing like, okay, stop,
Well, I
go
mean,
home.
yes, but you're also looking on the screen at uh, many layers of sabotage as well. I mean, it's like, I think that happened today. Literally today, I wiped something. I mean, major part of my process is wiping things down
Right.
and rebuilding them. So there is definitely um, uh, these kind of ruptures that happen when I was recently talking to someone about like good paintings, which are like the worst ones, because there's something about a good painting where it's just like, yeah, it's good. It has it has all the elements of one of my paintings that someone
Right.
could recognize and say that's a good painting.
Yeah, it's like calling someone nice.
And those are the most frustrating ones, because then I know it's good and it's hard to destroy something that's good. But in order for it to breathe, in order for it to have a life of its own, in order for it to give more than it can give in like, a 30-second viewing, that good has to be completely disrupted. And
Yeah.
that's where the sabotage comes in for me.
The first conversation that people have around your work is around critiques of modernism and identifying the slippage of how ornament has always been instrumental in the history of modernism, the history of abstraction. And I'm glad that we started from a place of like formalism and just going to the studio and making work.
The ideas are there, and they are part of what the work is about, but it's not what I'm focused on in the studio.
Hmm.
I think more when I'm working on an exhibition that includes collage and sculptural work.
Hmm.
Those relationships become much clearer and more concrete.
Hmm.
Um, so um, I it's funny because many years ago, a writer um, that was supposed to write about my work and then didn't uh, called me a formalist. And at the time, this was many years ago, and I had gone to graduate school at a time when calling someone a formalist would have been kind of an insult, right?
Yeah.
And fast forward, maybe a decade after that conversation, I was working with a curator, Tim Rohrig, in Belgium, and he called me a radical formalist, and I liked that one.
What Kamrooz has been doing with his practice for a very long time is unearthing those sort of hidden roots. Like you can look at so much of modernism and see that ornament never left, that it was always a part of it, and that this um, way of thinking about what stays peripheral and what is central needs to be kind of reassessed time and time again. And I think you do it very gracefully. Like there's a lot of like points of criticism or criticality that I think happen beautifully. And so much so that like what I really love about the work is that you fall in love with it first and then you have to deal with the consequences. And that's a really beautiful thing to be able to do where it's like, oh, but this is, and then I have to, okay. And that's a better way to think about a critical idea sometimes, where it's not like slapping you in the face, being like, you're wrong. This is
Yeah,
why it's wrong.
yeah,
It's like, no, baby, it's just better over here.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like, I've always been interested in how a certain arrangement of colors will be read in a certain way, right? And another arrangement will be read in a completely different way. To be more concrete, um, a modernist European abstract painting, let's say geometric abstraction, will be read in a very particular way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you give those hard edges curves, then it becomes decorative.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And
yeah,
that's fascinating to me because it's like it's such an interesting exercise in like form and sociology and just yeah, how do we identify something as exotic or other? And so it's what's interesting to me also is so many people write about my work and say, he uses Persian forms or like the arabesque, and what's interesting to me about that is although there have been times in the past where I've used the Persian carpet as a source,
right.
in the last 10 years I haven't done, and so it's these forms that just because they have a certain curve they're automatically Persian or then they're Arab, and for some people those two things are the same thing. And
And you're Persian, so that's it.
there you go. Yeah, there you have it. And I'm aware of that. Obviously, that's
Yeah, you're playing with that.
what I'm playing with here. Yeah, and hence the use of the term arabesque. And
I think, you were saying that like not everybody understood that you were using that with like a critical edge as well as with an ironic edge, because what the fuck is arabesque anyways? I've noticed that in a lot of contexts, artists of color are not given the opportunity to be satirical or ironic. Like
or
the
formalist.
or formalist. Yeah, it's like you are always already political. You are always already couched in a history in which you can't run away from. Like this is you.
Right.
That we know what you are.
That's Orientalism 101.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it feels like the possibility of being otherwise is never offered to the artist of color, and
Hmm.
that you have to fight for it. And then in fighting for it, it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll grant you. And then it's like, it shouldn't even have to be a thing. It's like there's just different modes, and the fact that you don't necessarily understand the subtlety in which any of us move between those modes is not my deficiency. It happens to be yours.
Right. I feel like the past, however difficult the past few months were to make these projects and put these shows together, I feel like the feedback that I've received for these exhibitions exemplifies that I am starting to reach people in a certain way. And Aruna D'Souza's recent review of the she managed to see the show in Mumbai, the
Right,
show
right.
in New York, and the Whitney Biennial, and sort of wrote a review about all three of them. Um, it felt, I often tell people there's nothing to get when someone says, I don't know if do I don't know if I get it. But then I said there's nothing to get. But when I read Aruna's review, all I could think was she really got it.
As a person who makes objects, I'm always impressed when painters can make sculpture in a way that's deeply convincing. Um, and I don't mean that as like a slight to painters at all. It's more so that like dimensionality is something that not everybody really considers in the fullest way, where like how things meet and join together is like a complex process sometimes. And if you've been thinking on a flat surface, when you make that transition, it's like, oh, you just put them together and it's fine. But you learn, and you're so precise about these things. Like it's the I'm always like, fuck, how does he make this shit? It's
Yeah,
so good.
I
Um,
appreciate that, especially coming from you. But honestly, the sculptural works are really kind of paintings. They come out of painting for me. So
totally.
I became interested in uh, the content. Speaking of the content of the work, the critical content of the work that we were just talking about, that's really what led me to making sculptural works. It just seemed like the logical next step. And in fact, if you go up one image to the collage work, this the sculptures really came out of the collage work. I started
Mm-hmm.
making the collage work first,
Mm-hmm.
and the collages are made from books that were books that document usually Iranian art. And my only rule is that they're published before 1978 or 79, which is the year that Edward Said's Orientalism was published. It also happens to be 78, the year that I was born. Also happens to be 79, the year of the Islamic Revolution in
Yeah,
Iran.
that's what I was like.
But that's
Wow, he
not
keeps
the,
saying a
yeah.
different thing that I'm about to say.
Well, I mean, people want to go directly toward that, and I think that's like definitely the least relevant of the three, in terms of like what the work is about. But although it's not irrelevant, um, and the pages are the actual pages from the books, oftentimes from multiple copies of the same book,
Hmm.
and I was interested in how we view these objects and how we assign value to them, and how, I mean, starting with the point that certain forms of abstraction are considered decorative because of what art historians in the West have decided
Right.
over many years. Um, and they're not even considered to be part of the history of painting. They're
Hmm.
considered outside of the history of painting, but
Hmm.
essentially they are painting. And how they are then categorized and archived in publications and in museums, right? And so I became interested in the kind of nostalgia that I had personally for the photography in these books. Is such a strange one. Like, look how the shadow is truncated there, and the stark contrast of this image, which is a luster painted vase. Sometimes I do use color images, which have often bright, colorful backdrops,
Right.
which is something you don't see anymore, also, and something that I felt nostalgic for. And I became interested in how the viewer has a certain kind of nostalgia in the museum, especially, a lot of Iranians that go to museums like the Met and kind of want to gaze at their glorious past and how great they used to be and what a wonderful culture they are and how much they contributed. And we had the first Declaration of Human Rights and whatnot, right? They love to brag about that stuff that was that happened, thousands of years ago, and so or
Should they not?
why not? Maybe several thousand years. When the two countries that I pay taxes to are busy destroying the country that's been producing these kind of ideas and culture and art forms for thousands of years. It's maybe we should
Not pay taxes.
Well, yes, that too. Maybe we should be nostalgic for it, and we should celebrate it. But anyway, I became very much interested in how design and architecture inform how we see these things, how
Mhm.
these kind of so-called decorative objects were often displayed in these very modernist buildings, and this kind of um, proposed neutrality of especially at the Met. Things are starting to change a little bit with the exhibition design, but it was always like raw linen
Right, right,
to
right.
represent like a neutral mode. So that's where the raw linen came in as a reference to, of course, the painting material, but also the architecture of encyclopedic museums like the Met. And then I expanded that into sculpture. That's another long story, but really one thing led to another.
Yeah, I mean the conditions of viewing feel really important, um, both in the collages and in the sculptures as well, with like the way that you're treating glass. In this, it reminded me of Albers, what sort of everybody widely learned from Joseph Albers in terms of like, well, this color next to this color produces something new, and those simple formal relationships uh, make you acutely aware of how you are seeing, and that this is a lesson in a very similar regard. It's just that it's not one in which it's just going to be blank color or that there's a proposed neutrality. It's like, check how you're seeing in a
Yeah,
different way.
definitely. I think that's particularly in a series from which the cover of this book is taken. This book has five different covers, which are each one of the five collages in this one work. There's five panels. In each one, I have matched a color from within the image and painted it as the border around the image.
Okay.
So there are five images taken from the same publication. So they're the same image taken from five different copies of the same publication. And each one has a different color from within to kind of become the field in which that image sits.
Right.
And so, the idea being that you see this image differently in each one of those. Um, Also, since they are the original, the actual page of the book, the color plate,
Right.
they're very likely to fade over time. So then it also becomes an archive of those colors in some ways. Of course, that's also going to be altered in some way over time.
It's nice that you embrace that and that it's not about like holding on to it, but it's like all of this changes and there's so many contingencies in how we apprehend history, how we apprehend an image, and how an artwork lives.
Yeah, and this, we can go back to the idea of being open in the studio and
Hmm.
being it's something that simple, right? This simple idea, like there were for a couple of years I was trying to control this. How do I display these images? I like how they look without glass in front of them. So I don't want to put like, museum glass and UV, this and that. How do I protect these pages? You have to protect a page. That's like the rule, right?
Hmm.
And
That's the rule.
right. Um, and I mean, at the Whitney, it's like I kept telling them more lights. They're like, no, 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 we can't put more lights than this on a printed matter.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so, it's like it took me a little while to kind of be open enough to understand that actually that's like a really important dimension in the work that these pages will fade. I mean, look at all of my work, right? It's about there's so much about the passage of time
Yeah.
and the changes that take place, the destruction of one thing and then the rebuilding of it with the memory of what was left behind.
Yeah. Like getting up close and seeing all the pencil lines, all the like there's so many ways of delineation and then things that have been wiped out. You can see the grid, you can see uh turpentine. You can
Yeah,
see the remnants of like actual destroying of that mark.
yeah.
And it's so beautiful, and it's an excavation as you look,
Sometimes I think that's what the work is really about.
that ongoing process.
just like the survival of forms. These forms just trying to survive being wiped away each time and redrawn and wiped away again and redrawn again
That's a much longer passage of time.
and yeah,
Yeah, that weirdly made me emotional. Like it's hard to
I
think
know,
about that right now.
I know.
Um, with this installation, with the screen, you've made screens before. It's like a border, basically it's like something that's delineating space, something that's addressing public and private. And something that you've talked about before is in the traditional Iranian home, there is a distinction between public space and private space. The private quarters andaruni and biruni being the public space.
Well done. Sometimes like the personal experiences influence the work even though they don't show up in it directly, right? So I was making this exhibition for the Arts Club of Chicago,
Hmm.
which is a public gallery in a private club. And the Arts Club, of course, for those of you that don't know, is was the first institution in the United States to show modern art before MoMA. So after the 1913 Armory show, the Arts Club of Chicago worked was a group of artists and patrons, and Duchamp was involved, and he curated exhibitions of Brancusi there, and their first building was Mies van der Rohe, and their current building has the stairwell that the Mies stairwell transported. And if you look at their collection archive or catalog, it's listed as an object in their collection.
Oh, no
Yeah,
shit.
yeah, it's wonderful. So
What a perfect place for you to show.
yes, and so so it took me a moment to speak with the curator, Janine Myleaf, and work through this idea that I'm showing in a private club. It felt kind of odd to me. But the public and private um, relationship that club has, where the members can go upstairs to the restaurant and everybody else can kind of hang out and see the gallery and attend concerts and whatnot. Um, that was all happening at the same time that we were in between homes, and I was living in friends homes and various kind of temporary homes. And so I was thinking a lot about the domestic environment and this kind of public and private space, and I went
Mhm.
back to Beatrice Colomina's book, Privacy and Publicity. And I love going back to texts and realizing like I completely missed certain things the first time around, and that happened with that book, finding out that actually Los's homes and Corbusier's homes had so much in common with, especially Los's home, with like the gendered space of traditional Iranian homes, right? And
Interesting.
she writes about that in Los's designs, and and anyway, so that kind of that, and there were these beautiful curtains at the arts club, some of which were designed by Lily Reich, who was kind of another woman who was like behind the architect who was getting all of the credit, right?
Mm.
Lily Reich was collaborating with him, but was not really known
Hmm.
for the work that she contributed, like Charlotte Perriand, for example.
Right.
And so that also made me think about like the Biruni and the Andaruni, which is like the gendered spaces of like the men kind of representing in the public and the women and the children being in the back, hidden away behind the curtain. And there was a lot of curtains involved. That's when I got into using textured glass in the sculptures and
Okay.
kind of having an object kind of behind this textured glass that you can kind of, and I loved how the textured glass sort of accentuated its like painterliness and maybe brought more attention to the object as painting. So they're ceramic objects, since this is being recorded. They're ceramic objects that are um, displayed behind textured glass that kind of distorts them and gives them this very painterly quality.
Yeah, if you isolate it and just look at it, it's almost as if it's underwater or like yeah, distortedly painted, and it's extremely satisfying.
Which is interesting because it's interesting to me how satisfying it is because they can easily be frustrating to view them because you can't quite decipher what's behind the glass.
Hmm.
Um, and it gives another layer to the question which everyone asks, and uh, which has to do with what are these objects, where do they come from, and um, as I said, it's about reevaluating how we assign value to these objects, whether it's emotional value, whether it's spiritual value, whether it's monetary value. Um, how do we see these objects? That kind of feeling that one gets when one is told that this vase is like 3,000 years old. And I remember, like, you were just in Hong Kong. The only
Hmm.
time I was in Hong Kong was many, many years ago, probably a decade and a half ago. And I went to this kind of supposedly antique shop, and I saw these incredibly beautiful ancient vases, and I inquired about the price, and the price was like, it was like high enough to be an antique, but not high enough to be like an antiquity. It,
Okay.
it was like, I was looking at this thing and I was kind of like blown away by how beautiful and the presence that it had to me, you know. And then when I found out that it was probably quote unquote fake, and I say quote unquote because it's not fake, it's a real
Right.
object, right?
Right.
But that it was not genuinely a 3,000-year-old vase. Um, I found that I had both a disappointment and a kind of excitement about that, you know, and that's something that led me to the sculptural work as well.
Can you talk about what can you talk about those two feelings?
Yeah, because I asked myself like whether I wanted to. I didn't. I distrusted myself almost. You know,
Uh-huh.
like I was having feelings about it, right? And and was I duped into having those feelings? You know, was I tricked into having those feelings because I thought it was charged with something that it wasn't, or was it charged with something by the artist that made it?
When you're going through a lot of museum exhibitions, a lot of the things that you're seeing are exhibition copies.
Hmm.
And so people are standing in front of things and they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm in front of the original, this, that, or the other." And it's not.
Yeah.
And similarly, it's like, what is it about that experience? Like, is it the fetish of what we try to understand about the authority of the original object? Is it that they're really moved by the piece? I mean, I'm sure it's some combination of all of these things, but like, would they also similarly feel duped? And like, would it break? Would the spell be broken? And like, it's like, oh well, I don't really care about this. I want to see the original.
Right.
But you had an experience.
I had an experience, and that led me to wanting. I asked myself, like, what other objects can I kind of put together? You know, obviously, I don't have the budget to buy like genuine antiquities and include them in these. Although you'd be surprised what's in these vitrines. You know, there's a range of objects in there, whether they're from a museum gift shop or a mid-century kind of antique shop, or some of them are genuine antiques and sometimes antiquities. I don't know where you draw the line, by the way, between an antique and an antiquity, but um,
I
yeah,
don't. I love that. Like I love that. I love that there's like a leveling of value in that particular scenario because it allows for more interesting things to happen where your relationship to codified history starts to kind of come undone. And
right.
you have to start thinking about like, oh, well, what is my experience of this and how do I start viewing these things? And
And what am I bringing to it? Like,
exactly.
what are my expectations? You know, what are
Exactly.
my false expectations? You know, I was able to find these brass pieces that fit perfectly with these ceramic pieces. So, these ceramics are not objects that initially had these brass pieces on top of them.
Mm.
That's something that I made in the studio.
The more that I read this really slim book recently. I got it when I was traveling, that is kind of about the myths of Islamic architecture, and that it's far from a unified thing, and like much of what's claimed to be kind of quote unquote Islamic architecture is coming from all sorts of places.
Mm-hmm.
And like sometimes you'll see in the carvings, like sometimes there's like Chinese knots, and it's like that has nothing to do with
Right.
Islam. It really is just like these people thought that was dope
Yeah.
and they wanted to include it.
100%.
And it's like that level of like cultural promiscuity is what I found in India all over the place,
Yeah.
where it's like just like, yeah, oh, I like that, and we should do that, and like it's just like a lot of cool shit that people just wanted to see together. And then with the veneer of ancient history, we're like, oh my God, that's India.
Right.
That's Hindu.
But
And
I
it's
think it's
like
also
just these
important.
words that you throw around.
It's also important, just like because of how you're talking about it. I think it's also important to acknowledge that it's not just like about like a willy nilly kind of grabbing of styles.
Yeah,
Like there's something that's also like spiritually valuable in those forms. That they found also,
completely.
and Islamic geometric pattern is something that developed over centuries. There are various resources for kind of getting into where those come from, and this is kind of like at the crux of like when I started making the work that I did way back when I was in college and trying to figure things out. um, it was because I encountered this information that um, these things that I had been told were decorative were not actually
Right.
decorative, that they had content, they had conceptual content, they had symbolic content, they had spiritual content. And yeah, I actually had the courage to go as a, I think, 20-year-old, go to George Washington University in DC and meet Sayed Hossein Nasr. And
Oh, cool.
yeah,
That's dope.
yeah, yeah, had a brief conversation. He humored me.
I don't think people are reaching out to him all the time.
Well,
Like, I'm
yeah,
sure that it's really amazing for a young artist to reach out to an academic and be like, "Hey, I'd love to have a conversation." I'm sure that was like a delight for him.
that wasn't the vibe that I got. He was there for it, but
All right.
yeah, he
Fair
was
enough.
he was patient and generous.
Before we open it up to questions, one thing that I think is fascinating just for a number of reasons is that you've gone through a lot of you've shown at a lot of galleries, you've shown all over. um it's not the greatest experience, but you've withstood and undergone a lot of gallery closures where you were about to have a show with JTT, and like you were literally the next show, and then Jasmine, who ran JTT, announced that the gallery was closing. And Perry Rubenstein, like you've had a few moments where you had an entire show ready to exhibit, and then poof, it's gone. And there's like all the time, all the money, all the effort. There's nowhere for it to go. And I think that's like a extremely stressful place to be in. And I love that you're here now, where three exhibitions and a biennial later, you get to, you get to sit and have a little comfort from all of those experiences. But what is it like to go through that, and what did you learn from those experiences?
I don't know. I think it's just kind of, I've always just seen it as part of the process of, like, I don't have anything else I can do. Like, I don't do anything else. I don't like, this is what I know how to do. And I was talking to somebody else about this recently too. I think it was in an interview so it'll be redundant, but I'd read Patti Smith's most recent book, which is her memoir. And at some point, she talks about how there's this painter that she knew, and she wanted to be just like him when she was super young. And she just realized she couldn't do it, and it was so frustrating for her. And she says, that's when I realized how to recognize the difference between a dream and a calling, right? And in a way, like that's like the one thing from that book that's really resonated with me, because I feel like so much of what I've done is because I just felt like there's no other option, you know? So whether a gallery is opening or closing or whatever, it's like, it sucks. It's like frustrating. And especially if, if I'm making a living from exhibitions, commercial galleries, etc., it's like an exhibition gets canceled, and it can also be a little scary.
Hmm.
But maybe another part of being middle aged that's nice is like I said, I've become a much better viewer of my own work, and I know when something's alive. And I knew I had a studio full of living paintings, and I wasn't worried so much. I was frustrated because I was ready to show them, but I thought, okay, sooner or later people will see these. And they did, and it worked out because I was able to organize these exhibitions. The I guess it was the Mumbai show that was mostly made from work that was um, ready for the JTT show.
Right.
And it's hard out there. I mean, Jasmine and I still close, and I'm not. There's no bad feelings about that.
I hope y'all paid attention to that. Like, there's a lot of grace there. There's a lot of wisdom there in everything that's said and everything that's left unsaid. And I mean, my last question is, who's big Kamrooz and who's little Kamrooz?
There's a publication called Transatlantique that's published in France in French and English, and they invite artists to write about another artist, historicized artist. And um I was invited by Mara Hoberman, who's a writer who also works at the Joan Mitchell Foundation, to write a text about Joan Mitchell. I went into that research, and that also resonated with me. I mean, Joan Mitchell had a very different life than I do, but also had similar frustrations and kind of uh, I don't know. We all have different ways of being, like having being present in public and being present in private. The best way I can answer the question is that there's a person that I have to be in the studio to be as effective as I can be. And when I am in that state, I am so open and porous that the world outside of the studio can be very dangerous. And so I protect that person. And I try my best when I leave the studio to put up enough barriers that I'm not a callous person, that I'm not, you know, but that I have filters
Hmm.
so that um, I can survive. You know what I mean? Um, because I think truly to go there, to truly be present with the work the way it needs to be, um, things have to be very, very open.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question then. Uh, what's the last transcendental experience you've had with a work of art?
I don't know if it's necessarily the last one,
Hmm.
but it's definitely the most significant one in the last 10 years.
Okay.
Um, I spent half a year at the American Academy in Rome, and I had a very hard time getting started in the studio there, getting used to I'd never done a residency before, being surrounded by all these people and, you know, trying to protect little Kamrooz. And it was a rainy day in February. I was feeling quite dismal. And speaking of having that like young artist energy, I just decided right then that I was going to go to Florence, and I booked a train, I booked a hotel, and I went that morning.
Hell yeah.
and I went to San Marco to see the Fra Angelico frescoes. And in February, despite the fact that uh, San Marco can be very busy at all times of year, it was very quiet, and I was there for 3 or 4 hours, um, going through the. This is the place where he's he's painted frescoes on the monks' cells, and I had this revelation that Fra Angelico was a formalist, that he was a spiritual formalist, that these stories that were told, the narratives on the walls, were the monks knew these stories. They didn't need to be told. So there were a lot of liberties taking place with the painting. They became quite kind of surreal in places, very modernist in other places, truncated forms, like weird geometry, and I just found that what he was doing was that the figures and the narrative was just kind of a a place, or like an armature for uh, form to become transcendent.
I didn't mean to interrupt the outro. Kamrooz, I've known you for a while, and I've really just loved seeing the arc of your practice and also just the generosity and wisdom with which you shared about your process today. And it's just got me thinking about what it means to be an artist that's going through these different phases and how to handle that with grace and also what you take into each phase of being an artist. And so I want to know what kind of artist you see yourself being in 20 or 30 years from now.
Great fucking question.
That is an impossible question to answer. Um, I never think about that. I just realized you've made me realize I never think about what kind of artist I'll be in even a year. I think,
I get that.
yeah, I think hopefully, the best way to answer it is like hopefully a more relaxed one, hopefully one that's more often present in the studio and outside the studio. That's the part that I want to work on the most.
Okay. This is our last question, I promise.
How you doing? My name is Musa. I just had a quick two-part question for you. What does art mean to you, and do you believe in rules or not breaking them in art, or if you believe in any at all?
I found that I'm not like I haven't been the best viewer of contemporary art lately,
Mhm.
and that oftentimes what I'm looking for is those connections, like I had with Fra Angelico. Um, but the way that I think about rules is, I was talking to a student. I haven't taught for a while now, but I was talking with a student several years ago, and I said to them, "You don't have to try to be the best painter in the world. You just have to be the best at making your paintings." You know, and in those lines, I would say like rules are basically structure for my own practice. So since I make the rules, I can also change them or break them. But they do help hold things together. It's almost like a what's that? Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Give it up for Kamrooz.